The White House press room buzzed with tension. The fluorescent lights cast a sharp glow on the podium, where a tall man with a golden mane of hair stood confidently Donald Trump. He rested his hands on the podium, his gaze sweeping across the room, assessing the sea of reporters before him. The room wasn't silent, it was simmering with anticipation, with questions waiting to explode. Kaitlan Collins, a CNN journalist, sat in the front row. She had attended countless press conferences under Trump's administration, but the tension never faded. It wasn't fear, no, she wasn't afraid of him. But Trump wasn't like any other president before him. He had no hesitation in attacking the press, no restraint in launching personal insults, and he despised CNN the most. Collins knew this, yet she wasn't here to back down. She had a question, and she was determined to ask it. Trump's eyes flickered toward her. He knew exactly who she was. He knew which network she worked for. And he knew, without a doubt, that she wouldn't toss him a softball question. But that didn't matter. He was ready. Mr. President, Collins began, her voice steady. Do you trust Russian President Vladimir Putin when he says he wants peace? The room fell into a brief hush. It was a loaded question. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail of Trump's expression. But instead of answering right away, Trump tilted his head and smirked. I believe he wants to see something happen, Trump replied, his words measured, deliberate. Collins wasn't satisfied. She knew this tactic well. Trump was sidestepping. She pressed on. But do you trust him? Trump squinted slightly, then shrugged. I believe he wants peace. The answer was the same. But this time, there was a hint of irritation in his tone. Collins caught the shift. She knew Trump hated being pushed. But she also knew that if she didn't keep pressing, her question would be buried under the avalanche of other topics. So, that means you do trust him? Trump crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. I've already said. I think he wants peace. Still the same answer. But this time, Trump didn't wait for Collins to follow up. He turned his head, scanning for another reporter. Collins opened her mouth to continue, but Trump raised a hand, cutting her off. Sorry, we haven't called on you, Trump said, his tone light but laced with sarcasm. For a moment, the room was still. Then, a few reporters chuckled. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was enough. Collins felt a flash of heat rise to her face. She knew what he was doing, turning her into the punchline of a joke, making her the spectacle in front of everyone. But she wouldn't let him get away with it. Mr. President, I just want to. Trump raised his hand again. I love what I'm saying today. That line sent a wave of confusion through the room. Some reporters jotted down notes, others exchanged uncertain glances. Collins tightened her grip on her pen. She wanted to push forward, but Trump had already shifted his attention to another journalist, as if she no longer existed. Behind the cameras, the White House press secretary watched the scene unfold. She had seen this play out before. Trump liked to dominate the narrative. He never let the media put him on the defensive. If anyone tried, he would shut them down hard. And today, Kaitlan Collins was the target. But this wasn't over yet. Collins wasn't the kind of reporter to walk away from a fight. Collins clenched her jaw, gripping her pen so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her, the unspoken rule that no one should challenge Trump too aggressively if they didn't want to become his next verbal punching bag. But she had already stepped into the ring, and there was no backing out now. As Trump turned to another journalist, pretending she didn't exist, Collins spoke up again. Mr. President, if you believe President Putin wants peace, does that mean you don't support additional military aid to Ukraine? Trump paused. The room went silent again. That was the kind of question that demanded an answer. He turned back toward Collins, his lips pressing together in a thin line. That's a very stupid question, he said flatly. A few gasps rippled through the room. Collins, however, barely blinked. She had expected something like this. It's a fair question, sir, she shot back. Trump smirked, shaking his head as if amused by her persistence. You know what? CNN used to be a respected network. Now, no one watches you anymore. It's embarrassing. There it was, the shift from policy to personal attack. Collins had seen him do this before, countless times. Whenever backed into a corner, Trump's first instinct was to go after the reporter instead of answering the question. I'm just asking for clarity, Mr. President. she continued, refusing to let his words derail her. Trump let out an exaggerated sigh, then threw his hands up. Fine. You want clarity? I want peace? Okay. Everyone wants peace. But we're not going to let other countries walk all over us. That's what Biden did. That's why the world is on fire right now. Weak leadership. Total disaster. It was a vague answer, more of an attack on Biden than a response to the actual question. Collins knew better than to take the bait. So, does that mean you wouldn't support sending more weapons to Ukraine? She asked again. Trump scoffed. I don't know why you're obsessed with war. It's almost like you want it to keep going. Maybe that's just CNN for you, bad news, fake news, war news. But let me tell you something, I'll have this whole situation handled before my first week back in office. That's the difference between me and the other guy. Collins opened her mouth to push further, but Trump turned away again, this time calling on a different journalist. Brian, go ahead, he said, signaling to a Fox News correspondent. Brian wasted no time in asking a question about tariffs and trade deals something. Trump was far more comfortable discussing. Collins sat back in her chair, fuming. She wasn't done, but for now, Trump had successfully dodged her. But he wasn't finished making headlines just yet. A few questions later, another reporter brought up Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Mr. President, Mitch McConnell recently voted against Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s nomination for Secretary of Health. He's also opposed several of your key endorsements. Do you still consider him an ally? Trump leaned into the microphone, chuckling. Mitch McConnell? Listen, I don't know what's going on with that guy. Honestly, it's sad. Everyone knows it. He shook his head, then glanced around the room as if searching for someone who might understand his frustration. Let me tell you something about Mitch, he continued. He's been in politics forever. Too long, if you ask me. And now, I don't think he's even capable of doing the job. Have you seen him lately? He freezes up, stares into space, doesn't even know where he is half the time. A few murmurs spread through the crowd. Trump was clearly referring to McConnell's recent health scares episodes, where the senator had suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence and appeared disoriented. But you know what's really crazy? Trump went on, leaning closer as if sharing a secret. This guy endorsed me. Mitch McConnell endorsed me. Can you believe that? And now he's out here voting against my people? Voting against RFK Jr.? Unbelievable. Collins narrowed her eyes. The way Trump was talking, it wasn't just criticism. It was humiliating. And let's be honest, Trump continued, Mitch should have been out of politics years ago. I mean, it's no secret he's not in great shape. Some people are saying he's got polio. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. But you look at him, you tell me. A shocked silence filled the room. Even for Trump, this was bold. Polio? The claim was baseless, but that didn't matter. He had planted the seed. The press secretary shifted uncomfortably in the background. The reporters exchanged glances, some scribbling furiously in their notebooks, others typing away at breakneck speed. This was going to be the headline of the day. Trump, meanwhile, seemed to be enjoying himself. Now, I don't know if it's true, he said, but if he does have polio, that would explain a lot. Collins felt her stomach churn. She had expected Trump to go after her. But this was something else. She raised her hand, determined to ask a follow-up, but Trump ignored her completely, moving on to yet another question about trade. Within minutes, Twitter exploded. Clips of Trump's remarks flooded social media. Some people laughed it off, treating it as just another outlandish comment from the former president. Others were outraged, calling it a disgusting and baseless attack on McConnell's health. CNN immediately went live, replaying the moment over and over. Other networks followed suit. Every headline now revolved around Trump's words. Trump suggests McConnell has polio in shocking rant. Trump mocks McConnell's health in brutal press conference. Trump claims Putin wants peace, attacks reporters. Inside the press room, Collins was already planning her next move. She knew that Trump had won today's round. He had steamrolled her, dodged questions, and redirected the conversation on his own terms. But this wasn't over. Collins wasn't just a reporter. She was a fighter. And tomorrow she'd be back with even tougher questions. The tension in the White House press room hadn't dissipated. If anything, it had thickened. Trump had already dismissed Kaitlan Collins, dodged her questions, and turned the focus onto Mitch McConnell's health. The room was buzzing, not just with whispered conversations among reporters, but with the frantic clicking of keyboards as journalists typed out headlines in real time. But Trump wasn't finished yet. After answering a few softer questions from more favorable outlets, Trump's eyes landed back on Collins. His smirk widened. He wasn't done humiliating her. "You know, folks," he began, addressing the entire room but making sure his gaze lingered on Collins. "I miss the days when we had real journalists. The kind of journalists who reported the truth instead of whatever fake nonsense CNN and the rest of these people put out." Collins didn't flinch. She held his gaze unshaken. "But CNN," Trump continued, shaking his head, "it's a disaster. You know that, right? Nobody watches CNN anymore. You guys used to be a big deal. Now, ratings are in the toilet. People don't trust you. And why would they? All you do is lie." Somewhere in the room, a few reporters exchanged glances. They had heard this before. It was one of Trump's favorite strategies: discredit the media, sow doubt, and make sure that no matter what he said, his supporters would believe him over the press. Collins, however, refused to let him have the last word. "Mr. President," she said, speaking over him, "are you saying that CNN is lying about your statements on Putin? Because we're simply quoting you." Trump's smile vanished for a second. "I didn't say that," he shot back. "I said you twist things. That's what you do. You take my words and you turn them into something else." Collins raised an eyebrow. "So, you didn't say you trust Putin?" "I said I believe he wants peace," Trump corrected, his tone sharper now. "There's a big difference." "But of course, you won't report that." Collins didn't back down. "So, just to clarify, you're saying you don't trust him?" Trump opened his mouth, then stopped. He could see where she was leading him. If he said he didn't trust Putin, it would contradict his earlier statements. If he said he did, it would confirm the narrative that he was too soft on Russia. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the podium. "You know, you're really bad at this." A few nervous chuckles echoed through the room. Trump shook his head, then turned to another journalist, effectively ending the exchange. Collins sat back, biting the inside of her cheek. He had dodged her again, but she wasn't giving up. A journalist from Reuters stood up next, steering the conversation toward China. "Mr. President, there have been reports that China is considering restricting trade with the U.S. in response to your proposed tariffs. Do you believe this will escalate into a trade war?" Trump scoffed. "We've already been in a trade war. The problem is, Biden surrendered. The second he got into office, he gave China everything they wanted. You look at the numbers, it's a disaster. But under my leadership, that's not happening," the reporter pressed further. "But if China retaliates, they won't," Trump interrupted. "Because they know better. Look, I've dealt with Xi Jinping. He's smart, okay? I respect that. But he also knows I don't play games. If China tries to screw us over, they're the ones who will pay." It was classic Trump's strong rhetoric. No specifics, but it was enough to energize his base, who saw him as the only leader willing to stand up to China. Then came another landmine. A journalist from the Associated Press raised her hand. "Mr. Hand, President, would you support a nationwide ban on TikTok?" Trump leaned back slightly. He hadn't expected that question, but he didn't let it show. "Well, look," he began. "TikTok is a problem. We all know it. It's run by China. They're taking our data, spying on Americans. It's a national security threat." There were nods across the room. Even some of Trump's critics acknowledged the risks posed by TikTok's Chinese ownership. "But here's the thing," Trump continued. "I wanted to ban it. I had a plan. And then Biden came in and did nothing. Typical. Just like with everything else." The journalist followed up. "So, if you were re-elected, would you ban it?" Trump hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the reporters to notice. "Well, we'll see," he said finally. "I think there are a lot of things we can do. But what I won't do is let China control our economy." It was an evasive answer, but it was enough for his supporters to interpret however they wanted. Then, something unusual happened. A journalist from a foreign outlet, speaking with a thick accent, tried to ask a question about U.S.-India relations. His voice wavered slightly, and his pronunciation wasn't entirely clear. Trump frowned, tilting his head. I'm sorry, what? He asked. The journalist repeated the question, but Trump only shook his head. I have no idea what you just said. A few awkward laughs scattered through the room. The journalist looked embarrassed, but before he could try again, Trump turned to the audience, grinning. Can someone translate for me? He joked. Seriously, I don't know what's going on here. The discomfort in the room was palpable. Some reporters looked down, others awkwardly smiled. The journalist, now visibly flustered, tried once more, but Trump had already moved on. Collins felt a surge of anger. She knew exactly what had happened. Trump had made a spectacle of the journalist's accent, deliberately embarrassing him instead of simply asking for clarification. It was the same tactic he always used mockery as a weapon, and she wasn't going to let it slide. Without waiting for permission, Collins spoke up. Mr. President, was that necessary? Trump turned toward her, clearly annoyed. Excuse me? The way you spoke to him, Collins clarified. He was trying to ask a legitimate question. Trump rolled his eyes. Oh, give me a break. Collins didn't back down. You just humiliated a journalist for having an accent. Do you think that's presidential behavior? Trump exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You know, you're really something else. First, you lie about me. Now, you're trying to make me out to be the bad guy for not understanding a question? You could have just asked him to repeat it, Collins pointed out. Trump smirked. I did. And guess what? I still didn't understand it. That's not my fault. The room was divided. Some journalists looked uncomfortable, others were scribbling furiously. This exchange would be another viral moment, Collins challenging Trump head-on. Trump, however, had had enough. He turned away from her once more, signaling for the next question. But the damage was done. Collins had made her point, and the headlines were already being written. The press room was now a battlefield of words and tension. Trump had dismissed Collins again, ridiculed a foreign journalist, and doubled down on his stance against CNN. But even as he moved on, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Every journalist there knew what had just happened wasn't just another press conference. It was a moment that would dominate the news cycle for days. Collins remained seated, her expression unreadable, but inside, she was boiling. She had faced Trump's hostility before, but this felt different. He had not only dismissed her questions, but had deliberately undermined the credibility of the press itself again. The CNN team outside the White House was already working. Clips of the exchange were being cut, prepared for immediate broadcast. The headline was obvious. Trump attacks CNN reporter, dodges questions on Putin and foreign policy. Meanwhile, social media had erupted. Within minutes, the hashtag Trump vs. Collins was trending, with opinions split down the middle. Trump's supporters praised him for shutting down fake news, while his critics accused him of bullying a journalist who was simply doing her job. But inside the room, the conference continued. A journalist from the Wall Street Journal took the floor next, steering the conversation toward the economy. Mr. President, inflation has been a key issue under the Biden administration. If re-elected, what steps would you take to bring it under control? Trump's demeanor instantly changed. Unlike the more confrontational exchanges, this was a question he was eager to answer. Well, first of all, we wouldn't be in this mess if I were still in office, he began, leaning confidently into the microphone. Inflation? It was never a problem under me. We had the strongest economy in history. Gas prices were low, jobs were booming, and then Biden came in and boom, everything collapsed. He shook his head, gesturing wildly. Now look where we are. Grocery prices are through the roof. People can't afford rent. It's a disaster. And why? Because the people running this country are incompetent. Totally incompetent. The journalist followed up. So, if you return to office, what specific policies would you implement? Trump didn't hesitate. Day one, we cut spending. We bring back American energy. No more relying on foreign countries. We drill, we produce, and we make America energy independent again. The room remained silent as Trump continued. And another thing, we stop sending billions to other countries while Americans are struggling. You see what's happening? We're giving money away, and for what? It's ridiculous. Some journalists took notes. Others simply listened. Trump's economic rhetoric had always been his strong suit, bold, confident, and filled with broad statements that resonated with his base. Then, another journalist shifted the topic. Mr. President, earlier you mentioned Mitch McConnell voting against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Secretary of Health. What are your thoughts on his nomination moving forward? Trump's expression darkened slightly. Well, first of all, RFK Jr. is a great guy, smart, tough, and he's not afraid to stand up to these corrupt people running the system, he said. Mitch McConnell, on the other hand, he's been there too long. I mean, really? How many bad decisions can one man make? He chuckled, shaking his head. But look, the people love RFK Jr. He's got common sense. Unlike some of these people in Washington, the journalist pressed further. Are you saying you'll continue to support his nomination? Trump nodded. Absolutely. He's the right man for the job. And Mitch? Well, we'll see what happens with him. Maybe it's time for some changes. His words were cryptic, but the implication was clear. Trump was setting the stage for a possible challenge to McConnell's leadership within the party. As the press conference neared its end, a voice rang out from the back of the room. Mr. President, earlier you suggested that Mitch McConnell may have polio. Do you have any actual evidence to support that claim? The room tensed. Trump turned toward the voice, a smirk forming on his lips. Oh, here we go again. The journalist didn't back down. It's a serious allegation. Are you saying you have medical knowledge about Senator McConnell's health? Trump shrugged. I'm just saying what everyone is already thinking. You see him, right? Something's wrong. But the media won't talk about it. The journalist pressed further. So, you have no evidence? Trump's expression hardened. Listen, I don't need evidence to say what I see. Everyone's seen it. You've seen it. But of course, the fake news media won't touch it. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Trump wasn't backing down. If anything, he was doubling down. Collins, still seated, took one final shot. So, just to be clear, she called out, you're making medical claims without any proof? Trump turned toward her, his smirk deepening. Oh, now you're a doctor too? Some laughter echoed from the room. Trump let it hang in the air for a moment before waving dismissively. Next question. As the press conference wrapped up, Trump took one last look at the room. He knew what he had done. He had dominated the conversation, steered it in his direction, and left the press scrambling to catch up. As he stepped away from the podium, Collins caught his eye one last time. She knew this was far from over, and so did he. As Trump exited the podium, the room erupted into a frenzy. Reporters rushed to file their stories. Phones buzzed with urgent updates, and news networks prepared for immediate analysis. The moment Trump left the press room, his words became ammunition both for his supporters and his critics. Within minutes, Kaitlan Collins was seated in CNN's Washington studio, staring directly into the camera. The producers wasted no time, playing back the most controversial clips from the press conference. He mocked a journalist for having an accent. He suggested, without evidence, that Mitch McConnell has polio. He refused to answer whether he trusts Vladimir Putin. Collins took a deep breath before speaking. What we saw today wasn't just another Trump press conference. It was a masterclass in deflection, in misinformation, and in outright hostility toward the press. The anchor sitting across from her nodded. Kaitlan, let's talk about when he called you out directly. Did you expect him to attack you like that? Collins straightened her posture. I've been covering Donald Trump for years. This isn't new. But what's troubling is how he continues to attack journalists instead of answering basic questions. When I pressed him on Putin, he dodged. When I asked him to clarify his stance, he insulted me. This is a pattern. CNN then cut to clips of Trump's previous clashes with the press, particularly his heated exchanges with Jim Acosta. The message was clear: Trump hadn't changed. Meanwhile, over at Fox News, the coverage was starkly different. A panel of conservative commentators sat around a sleek news desk, dissecting the press conference. What we saw today was vintage Trump, one of them said, shaking his head. The media tries to trap him, and he doesn't take the bait. He pushes back. That's why his supporters love him. The host nodded. And look at Kaitlan Collins. She went in looking for a fight. She wasn't asking questions, she was making accusations. The discussion quickly shifted to how liberal media was twisting Trump's words, turning a routine press conference into a scandal. "Look, let's be honest," another panelist chimed in. "Nobody actually cares if Trump thinks Mitch McConnell has polio. What they care about is inflation, crime, the economy." The media focuses on distractions. Fox News then cut to a segment featuring a group of Trump supporters being interviewed outside a rally. One man in a MAGA hat laughed, saying, "I don't care what he said about McConnell. The guy's been in Washington forever. Trump tells it like it is." Another woman chimed in, "The media wants to make Trump look bad, but all he did was stand up to them. We need a president who fights back." The divide was clear, two entirely different narratives emerging from the same event. As news networks battled over how to frame the press conference, Twitter became a war zone. The hashtags #Trump vs. Collins, #McConnell Health, and #Trump Press Conference dominated the trending list. On the left, Trump mocking a journalist's accent is disgusting. Trump just made up a health diagnosis for McConnell. How is this okay? This is why he's dangerous. He refuses to answer basic questions and attacks the press instead. On the right, Trump bodied CNN again. Classic. Why does the media care more about McConnell's health than the economy? Kaitlan Collins got what she deserved. Some posts went viral, particularly a slowed-down clip of Trump's sarcastic, "Oh, now you're a doctor too?" directed at Collins. It quickly became a meme, with Trump supporters using it mockingly and his critics using it as proof of his dismissive attitude toward the press. While the media focused on Trump's war with reporters, something more significant was happening behind closed doors. Republican lawmakers were divided. Some, particularly those aligned with Trump, defended him wholeheartedly. Senator Josh Hawley posted on X, "Mitch McConnell represents the old GOP. Trump represents the future." Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene went even further. "Trump is right. McConnell's time is up. We need fresh leadership." But other Republicans were less enthusiastic. Senator Mitt Romney, a longtime Trump critic, told reporters, "Speculating about someone's health without evidence is beneath the dignity of the office of the presidency." Even Senator Lindsey Graham, usually a staunch Trump ally, seemed uneasy. When asked about Trump's comments on McConnell, he simply said, "I think we should focus on policy, not personal attacks." The divide within the GOP was clear. Trump still held immense power, but his comments about McConnell had touched a nerve. Late that evening, a statement was released from Mitch McConnell's office. Senator McConnell remains in excellent health and continues to focus on serving the American people. He does not engage in baseless speculation. It was a short, carefully worded response, designed to dismiss Trump's remarks without escalating tensions further. But the damage had already been done. As the night wore on, one last unexpected development took place. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the man at the center of Trump's McConnell rant, posted a cryptic tweet, "Interesting day. Let's talk soon." No one knew exactly what he meant. Was he distancing himself from Trump's attack on McConnell? Was he about to make a statement of his own? Or was he simply enjoying the chaos? One thing was certain: this story wasn't over yet. And with Trump, it never was. The morning after Trump's explosive press conference, the political landscape was still reeling. News outlets dissected every moment. Social media remained in a frenzy, and Republican leadership found itself at a crossroads. As expected, Trump didn't stay silent. At exactly 7:45 a.m., he posted on Truth Social, "Fake news is at it again. They don't talk about how I destroyed Biden's failures in the press conference, no. They only focus on McConnell and CNN's failing ratings. Sad. We need strong leaders, not career politicians who can't even stand up straight. #MAGA. It was classic Trump aggressive, dismissive, and turning himself into the victim. His base loved it. The post gained hundreds of thousands of shares, with his supporters flooding the comments. Trump tells it like it is. McConnell needs to retire. We need real fighters. CNN got wrecked. Beautiful. But while Trump's followers rallied, the broader political world was less enthusiastic. By midday, whispers of a divide within the Republican Party had turned into open discussions. Fox News aired a segment where a Republican strategist cautiously commented, "Look, we all know. Trump has a unique way of speaking, but the party needs to be focused on winning elections, not infighting. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans held closed-door meetings. Some were furious at Trump's remarks about McConnell. Others saw it as an opportunity to shift power within the party. One anonymous senator was quoted in Politico, "Trump is testing the waters. He's seeing how far he can push McConnell before we have to choose between them." For now, no Republican dared to challenge Trump directly, but cracks in the foundation were showing. Later that night, Kaitlan Collins appeared on CNN again, closing out a day of coverage. She looked directly into the camera and said, "Donald Trump didn't just attack me yesterday. He attacked the very idea of accountability. As journalists, we're here to ask tough questions. And no matter how many times he dodges or insults, we won't stop." Her words were met with applause from media colleagues and scorn from Trump supporters. The divide deepened. Just when it seemed the controversy might settle, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made his move. At 9:30 p.m., he posted a video message. "I appreciate President Trump's support, but I will not be used to divide the Republican Party. We need unity, not chaos." It was a subtle but clear message. Kennedy was distancing himself from Trump's attack on McConnell. For the first time in a long time, Trump didn't have full control of the narrative. As the dust settled, one question remained: had Trump overplayed his hand? He had survived scandal after scandal before. But with McConnell's allies growing restless, the media more aggressive, and even RFK Jr. keeping his distance, was this the beginning of a new political battle? One thing was certain. This wasn't the last time Trump would face off with the press, and it certainly wasn't the last time Kaitlan Collins would ask him a question he didn't want to answer.